Any side out on freedomslips.com on the #1 listener supported talk radio on the net. So push the donate button or subscribe to the archives for only $5 a month. And you can do that through Patreon on the website. If you're new to Shiny Side Out, welcome aboard. This is a tinfoil hat zone. So keep your arms within the vehicle, turn off your personal reality inverters, and please, no flash photography. We're glad you're on board. We're going to make it easy for you to ingest this information, and thank you for inviting us into your lives. So follow, subscribe, or otherwise for the appropriate social media. I said it again, social media platform. We're halfway through show number 449. Pause for me.
940 and 400.
And we're still talking about probably the most important in-your-face topics that we've ever researched, and that is that there were and are things on the planet which present themselves from time to time to some people, not everyone, and it's important to realize that ignoring it doesn't make it go away. One of the people that we interviewed a long time ago, Lloyd Pye, has a connection to both the physical, biological artifacts that we've been talking about prior civilizations on the planet. But this, tonight, we are talking, adding to this conversation by talking about, the Bigfoot, the Yeti, the Ulma, and the rest of the descriptive verbs. They're verbs, Becky? Nouns.
There you go.
There you go. The hairy man, the Sasquatch. It's all a bit squatchy, and how UFOs. To be honest, we're not doing this together so much, but how there's different camps, and the Bigfoot people don't talk to the UFO people, and they don't want to likewise backwards, and they don't want to admit that there's something there. So that's where this came from. And since Lloyd Pye and the Star Child skull, and I told you, Mickey, there was a second Star Child skull found, which is completely identical to the one that was in the in Lloyd Pye's custody for a while. It wasn't his; he just had it with him. That it's a thing. That there's so many people making Mothman's back again, and so are these cryptids are back, and the bipedal dogs that are walking around, and the red-eyed Mothman guy, and all these things are now starting to come back to light again.
Oddly. Well, they come back to prominence in in our news cycles. I don't think they ever went away completely, but I think you're right. There's a renewed interest and a renewed. It turns up again in the news, as it were.
Yes, absolutely. I think, yeah. So the silence didn't mean, absence of information, right? It was still there. And it's usually drowned out by the things, and just like we saw what O'Hare Airport sighting. It made some news. That was UFO sighting. It made some news and disappeared again. But the Tic Tac, Mickey, I think has come up the most recently, and I like to torment my friends with how they feel about the UFO phenomena now. If the US military are declaring that it's a thing, UAPs instead, and what their expectation is now on a larger scale. Do they think they come from space, another dimension, or they already live here? And you can have any other choice you want. They're the three that I come up with. So, Mackie, this is that thing. It's all about, from our perspective, when we research, what is the current consensus, and how has it changed if I bring this new thing to light to you? And I'm fascinated by people's inability to comprehend a new position that they've formulated for 50 years, despite there being, a revelation.
Well, look, it's before we go anywhere though. Before we go anywhere, we have to give a public health warning, Dave.
Yes.
Do you want to go there?
This is the tinfoil hat zone.
That's the one.
I did intro that. You know,
Did you?
Yeah, turn off your personal reality inverters. No
sorry.
flash photography.
Oh, I missed it.
I covered all
Sorry,
that.
My bad.
No.
But look,
it's okay.
yeah.
It's still good. And yeah, or the only thing I didn't mention was that everyone should grab some merchandise from the station's website. That's what I didn't say. And that you might, if at all possible, if you feel it's appropriate, you can make a donation and receive a gift in return, like an EMP-proof thumb drive that'll get us through an EMP, and it can have all your documents. In fact, it's got documents that we can't mention in there, survival documents and things to be able to get maybe proof in advance of an EMP, where you can go to the bank and say, hey, this is what Hawk in his bumper says, hey, this is the money I had, can you give it to me? Right? Because all the records will be offline. So yeah, very important. And look, it's building a community and get that community word again, and getting yourselves back up and running as fast as possible. I think that's the most important thing. And the last point, Mackie, I was raising this week with one of my friends was the power we use today, the power we have, and not our political power, but the energy, the electricity that we use. If it was turned off in any disastrous event, we can't turn it back on, because it requires power to turn it back on in the first place. We wouldn't have the ability to be able to restore it. And the longer that period is from when it's turned off to when we'd be capable of turning it back on again, the less chance we have of our civilization surviving with its current technology.
Yeah, the reboot wouldn't happen.
The longer between the reboot and the event, the less likely we'd be able to come back to where we are. So extraordinary. Like, we'd have tales. We'd have tales about the past. But anyway, I'll hand it over to you, Mackie, and you can intro this tonight.
No worries. Look, we like Dave mentioned earlier, we are going to talk about all the creatures, hominoids, as it were, that seem to inhabit the planet with us. Notwithstanding that we haven't got any concrete proof, and the proof that we have otherwise seems to be quite conclusive. There also seems to be a connection between Bigfoot, Yeti, Alma, Yeren, Yahweh, etc., whatever they're called elsewhere, to the UFO phenomenon and to other things that Bigfoot and Yeti, I think. And it's really important to understand that this is not just an isolated phenomenon, but it's linked to a large number of other phenomena, including park disappearances that we covered. Remember that the show that we spoke about, where people seem to be disappearing at an alarming rate in national parks, etc. But let's just examine this here from a skeptic's point of view first. Right, I wanted to share with all of you what the debunkers think, and then I want to go into what we actually know, right? All the things that we know. So I found two interesting points of view. One was published by the Smithsonian magazine. That's the first one, and the other one was published by Mansfield News Journal, and it's detailing I guess it's a presentation that was held in 2017, talking about Bigfoot and why Bigfoot is likely not real. Right. So these are just the debunkers' points of view, and I think it's important that we understand that. So why do so many people still want to believe in Bigfoot? The article asks. Right. The appeal of the mythical wild man holds strong. 60 years ago this fall, Bigfoot first stepped into the public consciousness, which is not true, but we'll just leave it as a statement.
200 years here in Australia, at least.
Yeah, and longer elsewhere. But,
Yeah.
Be that as it may. Giant footprints puzzle residents, a headline in the Humboldt Times announced. The small Northern California newspaper reported that a road construction crew had discovered human-like footprints that were a massive 16 inches long. The paper was the first to give the mysterious animal that made the prints its memorable moniker, Bigfoot, and the creature has been stomping through the American imagination ever since. So that's actually not right. The term Bigfoot, yes, all right, but before that, the Native Americans and others had talked about Sasquatch or the wild man,
the crying woman,
bingo,
as well. And here it was the hairy man in Australia.
100%.
And that's translated directly from the native Aborigines. Their description, yeah.
So the first device that's being used here is to create the impression that the Bigfoot phenomenon is relatively recent. It is not. The term Bigfoot, just like the term flying saucer, is a recent phenomenon, yes, or a recent term, absolutely. The phenomenon itself, not so much. The Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization lists at least one report from every state, except Hawaii, over the past 2 decades. The most recent sighting in June 2018, well, recent as far as the article is concerned, was by a woman in Florida who reported a creature that looked like a large pile of soggy grass, or grass. Other evidence in the database includes supposed Bigfoot scat, which is its excrement,
yes,
nests, and noises. If a tree falls in the forest and no one is around to hear it, it may not make a sound, but it seems someone will report that a Bigfoot knocked it over. Again, using humor to give it less seriousness.
Yeah.
But again, it is what it is. Interest in the existence of the creature is at an all-time high. The paleontologist Darren Naish has observed, even though there's nothing even close to compelling as goes the evidence, according to Naish. Of course, Bigfoot is not the first fabled hominid to roam North America. Sasquatch has long populated the mythologies of American Indian tribes in the Pacific Northwest, but those 1958 footprints transformed the myth into a media sensation. The tracks were planted near Bluff Creek in Northern California by a man named Ray Wallace. But his prank was not revealed until his death in 2002, when his children said it had all been just a joke. By that point, more important evidence had entered the Bigfoot file. In 1967, Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin filmed a few seconds of a hairy creature walking on 2 legs by the same Bluff Creek, the most famous and contested piece of Bigfoot evidence to this day. That the Patterson-Gimlin film was created in the same place that Wallace had staged his hoax is just one reason to doubt its authenticity. Skeptics say the animal was a man in a costume, while believers argue that the creature's movements and body proportions cannot possibly have been human. The debate has been raging for half a century, which raises a question of its own. How is it that the evidence has not gotten any better despite the exponential increase in the quantity and quality of cameras? Asks Benjamin Redford, a research fellow with the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. But the article goes on. This is where I give them credit. Still, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence either. Wild animals don't exactly mug for photos, and the planet's ever-shrinking forest still regularly unpack surprises, such as the saola, an untamed cousin of the cow that was discovered by scientists in Vietnam in 1992. But the saola did not have legions of amateurs hunting it with cameras. With or without hard evidence, many people clearly want to believe in Bigfoot, which suggests we're dealing more with human imagination than human evolution. I don't know about the legions of people, hunting with cameras, and unfortunately, if you have ever been in the bush, I don't know if any of you have been in the parklands, in the bush, in jungle land. If you go into really wild territory, you can't see 4 meters in front of you, right? Not really. And you might hear things, and you might see, shapes moving around. But if we assume that these creatures live in the most densely forested and underbrushed regions of the world, and they seem to have some kind of ability to just vanish. And again, this is where I want to bring in the UFO connection. They are connected to people's disappearances. They're connected to the UFOs. They're connected to a whole bunch of strange phenomena, including things that happen on the Skinwalker Ranch. So I don't think we can look at the Bigfoot phenomenon, and I'm using Bigfoot here because everybody knows what it is. I could call it Yeti, I could call it Sasquatch, doesn't really matter. We need to understand this is not an isolated or insular phenomenon. It is connected to a raft of other strange things. And what the the bankers like to do is they like to put everything into a box and compartmentalize it because it's easier to deal with. You just look at that, okay, and completely, nonsensical, doesn't make sense, etc., etc. Don't want to hear about it. So this is one opinion. This is Smithsonian specifically. Dave, why don't you tell us why this science professor explains why a Bigfoot is likely not real?
Emily Mills is the reporter for this. There's Loudonville. Bigfoot believers and skeptics alike packed Loudonville's Ohio Theater on Monday night for a scientific discussion of the legendary ape-human hybrid set to roam the North American continent. Mark Wilson, a geology and natural sciences professor at the College of Worcester, led the presentation titled A Scientific Perspective on Bigfoot to explain scientists do not believe it's likely the creature truly exists. Quoting, "I've long been interested in the Bigfoot legend and other strange and unusual things," Wilson said. Bigfoot, also known as Sasquatch or Grassman in Ohio, is usually described as a large, hairy, bipedal, ape-like creature that lives in the woods of North America. Wilson used the scientific method, starting with a hypothesis. Bigfoot is real. He then listed several examples of reported proof like footprints, remains, DNA, photographs, videos, and eyewitness reports. But with each category of evidence, Wilson disproved the hypothesis, explaining why each is not scientifically convincing. Just a note, that's my note here. Separately, scientists don't think it's very likely that Bigfoot is out there, he continues. There's no evidence yet to support the Bigfoot is real hypothesis, he said. Footprints, DNA, remains, photographs, and films have been faked and disproved in the past, he says. There are too many doubts, too many errors, and too many possibilities of fraud, he said. One of the most frequent examples of proof is eyewitness accounts. I'm laughing. Some audience members told Wilson during the presentation stories of their experiences, like a sighting in the woods or casts of footprints. About half of the more than 300 audience members raised their hands when asked if they believe in Bigfoot. But Wilson said these accounts are not reliable and therefore not scientifically convincing. He says, the problem is that eyewitness accounts are shockingly poor in reporting what actually happened, he said. They make good stories, but they don't make good science. And I suppose at this point, he'd be wheeled out, tied to a trailer and flung off into the woods to be dealt with by the creatures, naturally. Back to the story. Wilson also explained several reasons it's not likely the creature exists. There has never been any real biological evidence like bodies, bones, skin, hairs, or DNA found, he said. To have an animal be real in the world of science, we have to have some real part of that animal, he said. And there's nothing at all. Additionally, any kind of hominid, like a Bigfoot, would need a significant population of hundreds of individuals to reproduce. We should have lots of them out there, and we don't, he said. And primates generally flourish in tropical and subtropical locations like South America, Equatorial Africa, and Southeast Asia, Wilson said. It's not a likely place to find an unknown bipedal hominid, he said. Wilson said the myth persists because it's a tale that's easy to fake. Human perception is easily fooled, he said, so it's difficult to rely on what people see, especially if they already believe in Bigfoot and are looking for evidence to support it. The Bigfoot industry is also profitable, Wilson said, with television shows, conferences, equipment, and tours geared towards the creature. He said he believes it remains a classic tale of American folklore. I think, he says, it's fun to think of a mysterious creature in the woods, he said. They add a flavour to a world that's increasingly civilized. To have this unattained hominid lurking around in the woods. It's really quite a romantic concept. Loudonville's Cleo Red Fisher Museum of the Mohican Historical Society hosted the program.
It's interesting. There's a whole raft of assumptions that are being made. I mean, the primary one, I think, look, we all know eyewitness accounts are not as reliable as we would like them to be. But when you have that many eyewitness accounts, right? And my point here is, even if only one is true, that's it. That's all you need. Only the one. Mm-hmm. Then you have a phenomenon that you need to explain further. I also want to say something else here. So we need to have some physical evidence. So I'm going to mention two of my favorite animals here, and they're not small either.
Can I guess?
So number one, you can guess. Go ahead.
The coelacanth.
The coelacanth is one, absolutely. For 65 million years, we have nothing, right? And then we find one in the Indian Ocean. Clearly, they were all around the whole time, but there it is, right? So 65 million years, nothing. Then one is being fished out by European or American scientists. Because anything else doesn't matter. It's like if there's no one in the forest to hear a tree fall, would it still fall? Well, not if the person wasn't a white scientist. No, that's the person in the forest was white and a scientist. As many trees as one could fall, it wouldn't matter. So if you're a person of color, of any kind of color, or anything, not European, then your opinion, first of all, doesn't matter at all. And secondly, if you are white but not a scientist, then your opinion doesn't matter either. So that's what he's saying here to us, right? But okay, so only one is necessary for it to be true. But okay, the coelacanth. The second one, this is really interesting, and I'm going to come back to the cow as well. Until the year 1900 or 1901. The mountain gorillas were a complete myth. Nobody believed that they existed. Nobody believed they existed. But the locals said, no, they're there. But people didn't believe it until they had found someone, right? And they didn't have any carcasses either. They had no DNA, they had no bodies, nothing. Okay? And so why is that? Because it's a jungle. And usually these things are eaten up fairly quickly. The bones are scattered. It's not like these, they're just waiting for us to find them. They're not, and in fact, they are well advised to hide from us. And if they've been around as long as we have, and maybe longer, then they know they should hide from us, because we'll just kill them. Mm-hmm. Okay? Because that's what will happen. We just kill these creatures just so we can. We don't ask them, can we come along? We're not satisfied with just taking a picture. We want the trophies, so we hunt them. And if I was one of them, and I see what we've done to all the other wildlife in the world, I wouldn't want to know me either, especially if we consider that they might be a bit smarter than the average ape, if you will. I have a suspicion that they're much smarter
than the average bear, Mackie.
Smarter than the average bear. So he also says that it's much more likely to find them in Southeast Asia, etc., etc. No, we actually find them there as well. But this is the thing here: the human race has spread to every corner of the planet, and we are ill-equipped to live in every corner of the planet, but we do. We manage to do it. We're smart, we make tools, etc., etc. Large hominids, or even hominoids, I should say, really, here, are quite possibly just as adaptive as we are. And we've got stories of them from all over the world. So to be clear, Sasquatch or Bigfoot is a North American phenomenon, right? But, that's what we named them there. You have got the Yeren in China. You've got the Yeti in the Himalayas. You've got the Alma, also in China. Okay, you've got the Wildman. You've got the Yowie. You've got the Orang Pedek, and not to be confused with the Orang Utang.
Yeah, that's right. I saw a doco on that where local villagers have they come down from the mountains occasionally.
Correct. And they're not all large either. Right? They vary in size. Okay, they're just as varied in size as you would expect them to be, I guess, right? So just to be very, very clear, we don't have all the answers. And just in case you were wondering, we just recently discovered some mucus glands in our own nose that we didn't know were there. So I'm sorry if I'm a little skeptical about the skeptics here telling me that...
Skeptical about the skeptics. Debunk the skeptics, that's it.
Well, you can't just... So again, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And that's I mean, the article before that was very, very generous in making that statement, I think. And it's a true statement. Would we like more evidence? Sure we would. Sure we would. But, you know, if you, and I'm not saying that this is the case, but if we ascribe a supernatural context or some part thereof, and when I say supernatural, I mean something we don't quite understand, then it's possible that you know, we will never find any physical evidence, potentially, right? And it's possible that these creatures move through spaces we don't even see, okay? Because they seem to just pop up, disappear, pop up, disappear. And again, what are they? How civilized, how smart, how intelligent, how adapted are they? I don't know.
So Meki, just to add to that, it wasn't popular culture that where it seems to have spread, because in Australia, for instance, where in say Tasmania, the little tiny island at the base of Australia, it was well known back in when we colonized that there was the creature called the hairy man that would just, you know, come down and take some food and go away, and it was already known by the custodians of the land, the original ones, and these stories then came to the inhabitants, the colonizers, the Europeans who moved in, and not that I agree that was a very good idea, but that story then made it to the newspapers, and one was shot and people were hurt, and it was a thing. It was investigated by the police, this whole story. So that happened before popular culture. It's like the UFO sighting before we had, any kind of flight in the US, right? Or anywhere else in the world for that matter.
Right.
So it's the same as that. It wasn't that, it was a folklore and it came around and we heard about it and people started talking about it. Because in America, Mickey, as we know, the crying woman is a thing that the Native Americans were talking about, and then have those stories about them next to the lake and crying, but it wasn't. They were the stories of hearing those creatures. They learnt to live with them in their stories, right? And it's an understanding that's just happened. I mean, the Rocky Mountains and those spaces are absolutely tremendously large, but you're just hand it back to you, and it's about. They seem to pop up and emerge for a while, and interact occasionally, and then disappear again. There's howling, there's tree knocks, if you're familiar with the entire genre. There are sightings from children who are playing of very large creatures covered in hair, with a regular, a mostly exposed face, like a bearded person, right? Watching them. So if the debunker is just saying, well, you can't trust any witnesses, well, what would he be if he saw one?
A scientist.
He wouldn't be a witness, he'd be a scientist, right? And he'd go, no, I'm clearly delusional, that isn't real.
But that sort of self-censorship and even convincing yourself that something didn't happen happens a lot. I've spoken to a lot of people, this is slightly off topic, but I've spoken to a lot of people that tell me about their strange happenings in their life. right?
Mm-hmm.
And Dave and I had these strange happenings in our lives. We talk
True.
about them freely, and we have incorporated them into who we are. We just accept them,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, at face value for the most part. A lot of people that I talk to do not. They don't like to talk about it. They are not ignoring it. Ignoring is the wrong word. They're disregarding what they experienced. Right?
Yeah.
They're disregarding it. It was just, and after a while, maybe the memory fades away from it, depending on the strength of the incident. And it is just something we don't talk about anymore. They don't incorporate it.
It's also how comfortable you are with it.
Completely. I mean, how will people make fun of me if I talk about it, etc.? I mean, there's stories I've been told, and I would never repeat the person's name that told them to me because they asked me not to. So
That's
I won't.
right.
But some of these stories are strange, very strange, completely inexplicable, in fact. And yet there they are. There was no reason for the person to lie to me at all, because there's no gain for them unless they like lying, and they don't want the name associated with it, which doesn't even give them notoriety,
That's right.
So
they get zero gain out of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Unless the purpose was to mislead me, which again seems to be a very strange purpose because it doesn't lead anywhere, it doesn't do anything, But it's certainly interesting to see how people react to these things when they do happen to them, Dave. And the key thing here is, I think you said earlier as well, is that this was a thing well before popular culture. And it's a thing that's been a thing for a long, long time. In fact, one could argue that the Epic of Gilgamesh has a mentioning of a wild man, because Gilgamesh's friend, and I think it was Enki, that was his friend, was described as such a wild man, right? And they became very, very good friends. But because the gods wouldn't save his life, Gilgamesh was very upset, and they wouldn't give him immortality. So, is it possible that at one stage in our past we were a bit more open to these creatures? We intermingled with them. Maybe they are contemporaries, like they are today. And I think it really is a story of being contemporaries, not so much evolutionary, I guess, stopgags or sequences. I think the history of the world will show us that we cohabit this planet, or have cohabited this planet, with a variety of different species, which we think now of as maybe our ancestors or predecessors or whatever you're going to call them, right? Where in fact, no, not at all. They were just contemporaries. We just shared the planet with them, as we share the planet with orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees, bonobos today, in the same way, right? And to be clear, these creatures, if they're half as intelligent as they seem to be, would make it a point of not being anywhere near us. Right?
Yeah.
And who knows? Maybe there's evidence somewhere out there of carcasses or bones, and it's just been misidentified or mislabeled, right? Because we don't have any good comparison unless we find someone alive, right? Like a Yeti or a Sasquatch, and we can study that person. I want to say it might be a person rather than a creature, because they have, they're displaying intelligent behavior as well. Some aggression, certainly, but certainly intelligent behavior as well. Then we're not going to go to it. Look at ourselves here, Dave, for a second. I want to mention this to our listenership. What did we do with members of our own species right up until the beginning of the 20th century? We put them in zoos.
Yeah.
Right? We in Paris, in New York.
Yeah, we did. Absolutely.
In Sydney, we put the members of the African, the smaller tribes, the Amazon tribes, Aboriginals. We put them in a zoo. Because back then we didn't think, well, they're not really people, right? They're not really people. And if there was a creature out there that was aware of our nature, and we are the killer ape, we're the original killer ape, then I would not make any attempts to talk to me. I would run the other way. And then don't forget that people that would venture into the wild back in, maybe even as short as 50 years ago, even today to some extent, would all be carrying weapons. Nobody would venture into nature without carrying weapons. Any expedition would have, guns, swords, machetes, etc., dynamite potentially. Any exploratory mission would be armed, right? And clearly, our weaponry is much advanced compared to that of potential Sasquatch, Yeti, or Bigfoot. So
I want to add to that. So the explorers that travelled across Australia, just like just like in the US with Lewis and Clark, but to a lesser extent, of course. What our original custodians of the land did with our explorers in Australia was track them and stay unseen for thousands of kilometres of watching these and observing these people traipsing across the land with their horses and food and campsites and set up and then keep moving. And they stayed so unseen that only when one of them became ill did they step out of their, like, basically like being cloaked, Meckin, as a segue, to assist them. And that was when one of them ate those melon-looking things, and they said, you can't eat those, they'll kill you. But they taste nice and everything, but you've got to prepare them a certain way. And that's when they attempted to help them. But other than that, they just watched and stayed unseen. Exactly the same behaviour as the Bigfoot or the Yeti, for that matter. Because, Mecki, one of those things, what was in the diary of Edmund Hillary? Do you remember the entries that we spoke about? Mecki, Earth to Mecki. Anyway, so Edmund Hillary's.
Sorry, I was on mute. Go ahead.
Yeah, so Edmund, that's the old, but it's like going to have a seance. Can you hear me, Mecki? Make a sign. Meetings today, Zoom meetings are like having a seance. So Edmund Hillary, Mecki, do you remember the story?
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, right. Okay, so in his diary, he spoke about, with the Sherpa, discovering large footprints already at the top, or around the top of Mount Everest when he went up for the first time. The first time. And there's already footprints there, and they weren't regular human-sized footprints. And you never saw the creature, they just encountered the footprints. Like, what? Yeah. Wouldn't that yeah, I'd be questioning why I was there at that point.
Yeah. But for the Sherpa, for Tang,
it wasn't unusual.
It wasn't a thing. Because that's Yeti.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, all right. And this is the thing, though. All right, when we talk about people that live in the area, okay, people that live in the area, they're usually pretty good at knowing the area. Okay, if you ask people about certain things that happening in the area, but creatures they've come across, plants, etc., and chances are that they know more than you. Okay, because you're not from there, you don't know anything about anything, and what they tell you is probably going to be pretty much on the level. Okay, because these people are living there, unless they've got a good reason to lie to you, which is possible. They don't want you there, whatever the case may be. But for the most part, on even playing field, and if the locals have no reason to lie to you, you can take what they tell you, okay, at face value. And these people are much better at observing nature, especially if they're living close to nature, than any of us, any trained scientist. Again, and they will know the environment they're living in. And if someone tells you there's this creature and it's real, you can say, okay, well, I believe you. Fair enough. We've seen it time and again. Time and again, these creatures that were described, mythological creatures, they popped out to be real. Oh, geez, that's true. Oh, that's actually a thing. Okay. Significantly sized snakes that were reported, by major
Everyone
fossils.
thought they were ridiculous.
Ridiculous, but no, that's the thing. They're there. The bono, for the longest time, was believed to be completely mythical as well. Right? This is a slightly larger chimpanzee, a lot friendlier too. Other creatures. I mean, there was a lady, and this is a small creature in Sydney, just recently discovered a new spider. Took a picture of it, sent it out on the internet, and nobody knows what this spider is. It's completely new genus of spider. Right? It hasn't got the right number of eyes, etc., etc. We are finding new things all the time. Why is that? Because for the most part, we stick to the cities. I mean, of course, enough of us go out there camping, but even that is limited. Very few of us go into the truly wild areas, the truly unexplored areas, and there are a lot. If you go out to the Blue Mountains, and a simple example here in Sydney, go to the Three Sisters. There's a very large viewing platform which gives you a very nice view of the surrounding bush forest, if you will, right? and it's dense, and it goes on and on as far as you can see. And very few people ever actually go into it. There are walkways, sure enough, but these walkways are controlled. Okay, and when we go to parks, we usually go to designated sites. Very few of us go into the true wilderness. Some do, and those are usually the ones that have the experiences. Okay, they're usually the ones that come back as the eyewitness. Oh, I saw something really strange. Right? You listen to the hunters. Right? You listen to the people that go camping. You listen to the wildlife explorers, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
They will tell you what they've encountered. Most of us will not. And so the skeptic's approach or the skeptic's reasoning seems plausible to us because, well, I haven't seen it, right? I don't know anyone who has seen it. And if I did, even if I didn't know someone who has seen it, then it wouldn't be true because, well, I don't know it, and they're probably not very reliable, etc., etc. But there they are. We have these strange phenomena. We have these big cats. We have these yowies. We have these hominids roaming around. We do. And the reason we haven't found any physical evidence necessarily is maybe because they're just very good at cleaning up after themselves. Right? Maybe they are very good at hiding their tracks. Okay, maybe they're very good at avoiding us. And in fact, considering they're still alive, imagine for a second, Dave, here.
Yeah.
Right? And look at what we've done to the chimpanzees and gorillas. We've driven them to extinction.
That's right.
We have driven them to extinction. We now have to create habitats for them to live in. Mostly they live in zoos. If I was an intelligent hominid, and I saw all this happening to my cousins here, as it were, I wouldn't want anything to do with human beings. I would stay as far away from human beings as possible because I don't want to go into a zoo. I don't want to be driven to extinction.
Mm-hmm.
I don't. But that's what we do. We can't help ourselves. I don't care how well-intentioned people are. Eventually, we will drive creatures to extinction because that's in our nature. Okay, and we've always been like this. We've never been any different. And of course, if these Yetis and Sasquatches and so forth have been around with us for all our history, then they know us. And they know well to stay away from us. Maybe there was a time when we were closer, we traded together, maybe we even had wars. Who knows? The point is, by now, they would have learned to stay out of our way. Okay, these are not creatures that are stupid or limited. Clearly, they've got a very high level of adaptation intelligence, and certainly are very good at avoiding us. Still, we see them. Still, we catch glimpses of them, right? But I'm not surprised at all that we haven't seen any really hard physical evidence of them. That would give the game away as far as they're concerned. I don't want to end up in a zoo. Thank you very much.
No, that's right, Becky. One of the things that astounds me is just how far back this goes, and 1789 in Botany Bay in New South Wales, which was the first place that Captain Cook sailed into, and then was it the French, wasn't it, came in. But we'd already established in Sydney Harbour a town, right?
Yeah.
Okay. In 1789, there's an article, the Botany Bay Yowie, because we call them Yowies here, article, and it says there has been many various reports concerning the Mott fur prefring.
Most surprising.
Oh, is that what it is? Most surprising wild man or huge
savage.
Was it?
That's savage. That's an S. That's old style S.
Oh, wow. No wonder I couldn't read it very well. Giant. And they've got it like an artist's impression. It's nearly twice the size of a human. Very large, very broad, big head, covered in hair. And that wasn't new. It was just that it went to the newspapers. It was already a thing. It was what the Australian Aboriginals already called the creature, and it was a known thing. 1789.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's astounding, Meki, that's. I mean, do we have pop culture then? Mm-mm.
Nope.
Was there internet? No. Not yet.
Yeah. No. In fact, the term Yowie in Yahoo we'll learn soon.
Yeah. But I had to bring it up, Meki, because There's part of being a skeptic. How far do you want to go back? Are you just willing to let's call it skepticize, right?
Mm-hmm.
The modern take, or are you willing to accept and with and which is where science fails, right? It fails to be able to examine a story.
See, but this is where science fails in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
But look, the purpose of science is to not rely on imagination. That's really what science is. Science is meant to give you hard facts that are true every single time. That's the purpose of science. It's doing a great job. That's wonderful, right? I mean, look at science. We are thriving because of science. I'm not an anti-science. I'm not a Luddite, okay? But it's also important to understand what science cannot do, right? And when it comes upon a phenomenon, it can't examine with its tools, then we need different tools, and I keep saying this. And the best example I can think of that is in the Skinwalker Range, where you have these strange events and happenings and creatures as well. They're real enough. I mean, we've seen them. If you've seen the show, I do urge you, please watch it. And I do hope there's a second season. This is the one thing I wish is continued. It's funny enough that it should be in 2020 when this comes to light.
Yeah.
But the disclosure that I've seen in that particular show is nothing short of astounding. But this is where science fails. It doesn't allow for anything that is not completely and rock solid provable, and not allowing for the fact that some things might not be, in fact, provable in that fashion. Okay, look, let me put it this way: if you apply the scientific method to the double slit experiment, it would completely fail. You can't, and that's why we can't. That's why we can't explain it. So we don't know what happens. We have no idea. Our science fails us. Okay.
And the closest we got to explaining it was probability, math.
Correct.
That's it.
Correct. Yeah, but
still don't know why.
We don't know.
We just don't know why or how. But there it is.
Yeah. But it does fulfill all the criteria. It's completely repeatable. That's what science asks of you. Can it be repeated? Yes, every time. Why does it happen? I don't know. What does it signify? I don't know. And we don't want it. As scientists, we don't want to go into that space because we might have to go to a place which signifies a world that we simply cannot understand in scientific terms, right? If you allow for the double slit experiment to be influenced by the mind, the observing mind. I'm not talking about the observer as an abstract, but the mind. Then you open up the door to a horrendous flood of other phenomena all of a sudden, right?
That's right.
But you can't. So you have to stick with it. You have to stick with what you know because you cannot allow it, because it just doesn't fit into your worldview.
Well,
and yet there it is. Oh, there it is.
So not only does the double slit experiment ruin science for the majority of people who believed everything was predictable, but it also ruins our concept not only of space but of time as well.
Yeah.
Because it means time is not linear. There is so much about that which is the basis of where Meki and I come from our approach. Because if you'll always go through, if I had to say it one way or another, I would say science tries to come through the front door and just prove everything is there, and it walks out going, yeah, I'm good. But if you look in through the window, you could see a time when before the scientists walked in, where it was just in flux. And as the observer, if we were a non-partial observer, the observer walks in and then everything appears to act in a certain way. But the scientist doesn't see that. What scientists have done now is politely reversed out of the room, and they've tested and tried to test and try to prove it, and they've just said, oh, that's all a bit hard, that double slit experiment. I don't know. Hey, maybe my math guy next door can make it plausible in a way, and created an equation to come up with it, to go, all right, well, we sort of know now. We sort of know. We don't know what, and if don't ask any questions. Don't ask what we know, because we don't know. And that's really what they've done. They've politely backed out of the room on this one.
Yeah. Look, and that's really that's the long and short of it. That is the long and short of it. There's nothing else. we can say on the subject as far as debunking is concerned. We're gonna go ahead now and share, some other thoughts with you. Probably not today. We probably don't have the time, but there's a recent article that was published in May 2019, which we're probably going to share with you next week. We're going to look at the species of Homo sapiens and Homo, and we're going to look at Lloyd Pye and how he defines it, the hominoids, I should say, not hominids, but hominoids. And then we're going to look in some detail into each of them. Right? We're going to look at Bigfoot, we're going to look at Alma, we're going to look at Yeti, we're going to look at all of them, Yeren, and then we're going to conclude this in this 63 pages of show notes here, so it will be a while, by looking at what the researchers in history, or forbidden history of the human race, have found. The hidden history of the human race by Michael Creamer, which is the abridged version of his larger book, and we're going to look at pages 168 to 182 in case you're interested. The book is The Hidden History of the Human Race by Michael Creamer, because they did a lot of research into this, and they're arguing not for an evolutionary sequential progression, but rather a cohabitation with some of these creatures, and maybe we've already found the skeletons, Homo habilis, Homo erectus. Right? That's what we call them, but maybe we should call them Yeti, or Homo gigantopithecus, right?
That's a good point, Mickey.
Right? Yeah. Look, I'm just saying. I mean, we assume always that these creatures, especially erectus and habilis, have become extinct. They're just no longer in existence. Well, we know for a fact that there are living fossils. I mean, if you want to call it that way. Not only that, we also know that the fossilization process is extremely unlikely and rare, especially for land-based creatures, right?
Yeah, it takes an extraordinary event for that to happen.
Yeah, 100%. So just because something doesn't appear in the fossil record for 65 million years, and I'm talking about a marine fossil here, because marine fossils are the vast majority of fossils, right? Just because we don't find something for such a long time doesn't mean it doesn't exist anymore, which we all well know. Look, I'll be honest with you, it's my favorite animal ever. Okay, the silica. My favorite, because it flies in the face of what we expect, right? And it also flies in the face of what science just assumes to be true. And we know it's complete BS. It's not. It's just not true. Look, I'm not going to go into surviving dinosaurs, etc., like the Mokrele and Bambi, but we need to keep an open mind here, everybody. And we can't just blindly go along with what the establishment wants us to believe and says, okay, this is what it is, believe it because we know. I'm the expert. Really? Explain this, explain that. And the truth is, they will look at you like you're insane. And they will focus on certain things. Usually the bankers, they focus on a very specific thing, and that's where they spend all their time, right? Because if they were to look at the broader picture, it become very, very hard to dismiss, because the hominoid phenomenon is global, but they focus on Bigfoot. Bigfoot's only been around for 60 years because of this article, and that was a hoax. Boom, that's in the box. I've dealt with that. Oh, the Yowie, that's only been a thing for that long, it's a hoax because of that. There's not a single article I could find on the internet, or anywhere for the matter, that tries to debunk the Alma. Not one, Dave. Couldn't find a single thing on the Alma. No Alma debunking anywhere. Nothing. Zero. Right? For example. But it must be there, surely. No, but it isn't, right? Because maybe it can't be debunked. I don't know. Right? And Sasquatch is a Native American word, right? So Bigfoot, yes, we said that, but it's really Sasquatch we're talking about here. Okay?
That's right. With 20,000, 30,000 years of history.
Yeah, and the term Sasquatch itself is telling, right? I've written it down here somewhere. If I can't find it for you now, we'll definitely go through it next week at some point. But
the meaning of the word.
Yeah, the actual meaning.
The origin,
of the word. Yeah, I've got it here in the show notes, and we'll share it with you when we get to it. But the point is, it really is very it's very old. It's like it's a Native American term, right? That was taken by the I guess the white people to describe this creature. They didn't call it Bigfoot; they called it Sasquatch because that's what the natives called it. Mm-hmm. So I'm sorry, but we are nowhere near debunking this. We're nowhere near being able to say, that's all complete nonsense, because we just don't know enough.
When I knew that when I found out from Lloyd Pye that the UFO people don't talk to them and there's sightings that sort of line it up, that it seemed completely possible that they just visit here.
Sure.
Yeah. Just because they're hairy, right, and they're tall and big and, maybe a little scary, making us a little smaller, but that's only relative size. Maybe they're, 100,000 times smarter than us and come from a progenitor race. I don't know, right?
Absolutely.
Just like, the movie Predator. Maybe they have better tech. They just arrive here, gather some stuff, and they go away again. Or maybe they live, subterranean. Don't know.
But see, that's the thing. I mean, just because it's hairy and looks like a large ape, let's say, or like a monkey, right? We assume it's primitive. It must be primitive. Clearly, it's hairy. Well, that's a completely cultural artifact with us. We just make that's what happened when we first encountered people of color or black people, African people, South American people, Asian people. They're not white. So clearly they're inferior to us. And now we've just extended it from the human race to others. And that's why we felt comfortable putting them in zoos, right? And that's our own species. Anyway.
There's the music.
Don't go away. Joe Bear is having a run.
Yeah, every single week he does. And it's always awesome. Be part of it. Join in, call in. And we'll catch you again next week for another Shiny Side Out. This will be 450th show, by the way, next week. You've been listening to Dave and Mickey's Shiny Side Out on FreedomSlips.com.